Hi there, everybody. This is Hope and Tivon.
Hi everyone, how are you?
And we're putting together this very casual recording because we wanted to respond to some of the things that just happened in the last couple of days around certain truth tellers and whistleblowers in the truth movement who are being targeted, who are being hunted, and just to add some perspective to this because we think we have a really important perspective to add.
Right.
If there's anything else you want to get from this conversation, it's that there's electronic targeting.
Yes.
And there are energy weapons that are being used right now on people, on citizens, on whistleblowers especially.
As far as electronic harassment and targeting people and the targeted individual program, we've been writing about this since 2017. I have personally been on the receiving end of this also.
We just did a show on SGT Report. We did some shows with Todd Callender on Vax Choice as well, talking about the targeting that's going on with the whistleblowers right now that are coming out against the COVID agenda, against the vaccines, the bioweapons calling themselves vaccines. We've been talking about the nanotechnology inside of these vaccines. We've been talking about the grid that is necessary in order to run these weapons, right? And so, and just after we aired that show, it was interesting timing. All of a sudden, Karen Kingston released this video where she was in Mexico, begging for her life, saying she was being hunted like an animal.
Yes.
And she called out different people in that interview. And we don't really want to get into everybody's names and stuff too much, but we are going to talk about some of these people that have been coming forward publicly about the way in which they've been targeted. So Karen Kingston is one of them. Brian Ardis is another one that was brought to our attention just after we put the show out. People started emailing us with videos of Brian Ardis, and you know what? I'm going to go ahead and put all the links to all this backup information to this conversation underneath this video so you can clue yourself in on what's going on here. Karen Kingston did call out to Mike Adams, who did a broadcast asking him stuff, so he did a very diplomatic presentation about Karen Kingston's situation, so I'll put that link as well. We want to add to this a very important perspective. That is, when we listen to Karen Kingston talk about her symptoms, about how she was in a house in Florida and she woke up with these symptoms, like Tivon just said.
Or Dr. Buttar, for example.
Or Dr. Buttar, who is no longer with us.
Or Dr. Tenpenny, within the past year of her being in conferences.
Yep, Dr. Tenpenny, she talked about this. Dr. Ardis came out on a show. I'll link that below. He talked about this. They are in a place, they're at a conference.
Yes.
Or they're staying in a hotel, or they're staying in a house.
Someplace that's temporary.
Right, some temporary place. And they go to sleep, and they wake up, and they have all these symptoms.
I have personally been on the receiving end of this also. And the way it feels, it does feel like you feel sick, you feel weak. When it first happens, certain parts of your body is inflamed. You have soreness, you have redness, red eyes, swollen limbs, and you feel like you've been ran over by a car when you wake up in the morning.
Yes.
And the natural conclusion would be to think there's something in my environment. I was living in a flat that was relatively clean, but in general, especially if you're living a healthy lifestyle, once you're targeted, especially with energy weapons, it all comes on to you very suddenly. And you're very sensitive to the changes in your body.
The first thing I want to bring out here is I want Tivon to explain the targeting program, because they love to microwave you while you are sleeping in your bed.
Okay, so I'll preface by saying, and if you want to listen to my testimonial, that's available online as well. We can provide a link for that also. But I am a targeted individual. It was first applied to me that I'm aware of, that were actually caused detrimental effects in 2014. But the way this kind of targeting works is your residence or the place you are at is targeted. Particularly your bedroom.
They can get like a GPS location of your bed, right?
Through various means, especially if you make public the events you're going to be attending. Whether it's a friend, if it's on the phone. Phones, like especially landlines, can be listened to. And all of this is automated, by the way, at this point, with contractors and so forth. Human intelligence on the ground can find out where you're going to be with your itinerary, because a lot of that is public. I'm going to be at this conference on this date. I'm going to be speaking at this date. And they can act as if they are the audience. Well, like paying for a ticket, they can find out where you're going to be, probably high probability what hotel you're going to be in, and from that point, they can use the authorities to find the room you're going to be, and once they know what room you're going to be in, target your bedroom. If you're going to be at a friend's house, target the bedroom of your friend's house. And the targeting aspect is going to include targeting you remotely. That doesn't include an actual agent sitting there across the street, or an actual agent within some location where the targeting is going to occur.
So remotely, that's important.
The remote aspect removes the human aspect from it and makes the system more reliable and less risk on the attacker.
It's probably cheaper for them to do that way too, right?
And it's cheaper. And I'll just jump to it. It ends up being a platform either by drone or by satellite. So they don't need to have someone poisoning your water, putting themselves at risk, poisoning the food that you might eat or you might not eat. Now, those other aspects might come into play at a conference, but what I'm trying to tell you is that the Target Individual program, being almost 40 years now in maturity, has been fine-tuned to the point to where it's being done remotely to remove as many human actors as possible, so that it's an automated system to target you in a place that you're definitely going to be at, like your bed, to sleep after a hard day's work.
At the hotel room that you booked with your credit card, so they can trace that down and they know person X is staying in this room on this day. So let's get a lock-in on that person's location so that when they're at that conference, we can target them. And
I look at the caliber of the people that have been targeted. It's highly likely the day before, everything was fine.
Yeah.
You're generally feeling good. You checked in, you went to either your friend's house or the hotel, and everything is fine. But as soon as you lay down in that spot, your body goes through some kind of inflammation or attack of some kind, and you can't explain it. And it's either sudden, or you fall asleep, and when you wake up as if you're about to die. You wake up as if you've just been hit with a Mack truck.
Yeah.
That is targeting.
That's the question I wanted to ask you, for everybody listening to understand. What are the symptoms of microwave electronic targeting? Because people are saying, maybe I ate something, maybe I drank it in the water. In the case of Brian Ardis, he actually had his water tested,
yes,
and he found the poisons and venoms in his water.
Right.
So that's a different situation. Yes. But the majority of people that are like, well, it was the bottle of water on the stage.
Yes.
Because that's all they can think of, is some sort of biological thing that they might have ingested in some way. But the symptoms of microwave targeting.
Okay, so what I'm about to say, I am not negating or saying that the other things aren't happening also. And also that also raises the threat level of who's attacking you. Who's able to send human intelligence on the ground to target your water supply,
yes,
for example, in Ardis' case, to act as an agent for that one day to drop off excess number of water bottles, so that only you're like, well, this is unusual, but you drink the water anyway.
And Brian Ardis, by the way, was targeted in two different ways in the interview that we'll link below.
Yes.
First was they poisoned his water supply that was being delivered to his house.
Yes.
And the second was basically like microwave targeting.
Yes. Yeah,
Right,
yeah. He mentions that. He mentions the latter later on in that interview. But you have to look at the way you figure it out is over a period of time. You have to logically step through how you can possibly be targeted. The reason why I'm talking about electronic harassment is I've been on the receiving end of this, and I have an understanding wife that was able to help me, and together we work through this to understand how is it actually happening. I physically moved myself from that grid, but at the same time, it's with the acknowledgement that if you're in a place for a long period of time, like a residence, where you do something on a regular basis, because they have human intelligence, which is the government and its contractors, a lot of which are very unsavory to be given this job, they are able to get your patterns and actually intercede and come in and do things like poison your water, lace it with chemicals and things like that.
When you say get your patterns, you mean your physical
daily
life patterns?
Yes, I'm talking about the daily motions you do.
Like every day you wake up at this time?
You wake up, you give the kids cereal, you put them in the car to take them to school.
Not your signature biological frequency patterns. That's different too, and that's what they can hone in on also.
But you have both. These perpetrators, they would have both, but having the human intelligence on the ground is them being able to intercede and to disrupt your patterns and to exploit them for things like poisoning. So I'm not dismissing that. What I'm saying is, on top of that, if you're going to a new place, no one else knows where you are.
Right.
No one else knows where you are. It's highly unlikely within the several days of you being in that place that have human intelligence on the ground ready for you. That is highly unlikely.
Right.
That's
physical people.
It takes time to move atoms of human beings and convince them to go and do this thing, all for you.
Right.
It's more likely you're being tracked and traced without you knowing. You're under surveillance without you knowing. And then when you go to a new place, anywhere on this planet, when you fall asleep, you wake up sick. In general, that is the telltale sign of a direct energy attack. That is not some guy that is able to skirt up the apartment very quickly into your apartment complex and throw in the vial either before or after or while you're asleep, or before you come and check into your hotel room. That is not the maid knowing pre-adventure that you're about to check in decides to lace the Orangina in your beverage safe.
So let me
let
me run this list down for anybody listening. Tivon, from your personal hands-on experience, unfortunately, of being targeted, are the following symptoms of energy weapons targeting you, microwave radiation targeting you, such as frying you while you're sleeping in your bed with metal coils in the bed.
Yes.
When you're at a conference or traveling, okay? Are these symptoms associated with microwave technology?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Swollen eyes.
That's inflammation.
Burning eyes.
Yes.
Burning throats.
Yes.
Feeling like you've got you wake up catching like a flu or a cold.
Yes, your glands, your endocrine system is compromised, your immunity is declined. Anyone that wants to find out what are the harmful effects of being targeted, what you need to type in is military studies on the harmful effects of microwave radiation.
Right. So
and a lot of these deal with things like after World War II, radar technicians going up to fix the radar.
Okay.
And the radar and air traffic control is still on. That's a couple hundred meters away. And they're at the right altitude, and these technicians, these poor technicians on masts on another antenna, getting beamed as this beam comes through. My dad told me a story because he was a Navy technician. He literally saw someone fall from the mast. He went up to fix a radar, and another radar across the base was swinging. The dish was swinging around, swung around, hit the guy. The beam, this invisible beam, hit the guy. The guy died, and he was strapped to something, but he literally fell limp on the mast.
Wow.
So there's all kinds of well-established effects of electromagnetic radiation when your body gets hit with electromagnetic radiation. But predominantly, when you're given a certain dosage of microwave radiation, the things that are described are things like cold or flu-like symptoms.
Okay.
Inflammation of the endocrine system,
And inflammation is pain, by the way.
Inflammation is pain, and also
means.
inflammation are the precursors of all kinds of other illnesses.
Yeah, like when you wake up and you're like, oh man, everything aches, my whole body's in pain, right? That's inflammation.
Your immune system is compromised by being dosed with microwave radiation, an
Yes.
overdose in microwave. Basically, when you look at the effects of microwave radiation, it's very close to the effects of radioisotopes or nuclear radiation. And we can say this with authority because we had to look up all these effects from all of these papers that we've downloaded for our book that we wrote called Forbidden Tech that we published in 2017. Because we were trying to get to the bottom of my targeting and what everyone else was experiencing at the time. And during that time, we wrote in 2017, my targeting started in 2014, there was very little information except for something from Whistleblowers that was on forums that you had to scour the internet for at the time. Now, it seems like there's a lot more information out there. There's a lot more whistleblowers out there, but there's very little solutions about this. And it does look like it's state actor based. It's the government's doing this, and it is it's contractors.
So what we've heard a lot from some people that are in the truth movement with platforms is when people have these symptoms, whistleblowers have these symptoms, I'm hearing this phrase, it was some kind of aerosolized chemical toxin. Maybe it was in the vents, maybe it was in the food, aerosolized chemicals. There was even a long description in one case from a truth movement person who was saying they could go to your hotel room before you get there, and they could put all of I'm just picturing like this team of guys in hazmat suits, like showing up at your hotel room undetected by anybody, and just like spraying toxins all over your bed and all over your handles, and and then you show up at your hotel room and you touch all these chemical toxins on the sink and on everything, and that's how you got sick. Right. And nobody else that went into that hotel room touched the same toxins and got sick. The maid didn't get sick. Right. The housekeeping, the room service guy didn't get sick. Nobody else got sick because it's all these physical, biological, chemical agents of poisoning, and that's all it is. And it's not.
Yes.
It's not microwaves. Right. Don't say energy weapons.
Okay. Right, so we'd like to offer another alternative from the narrative that's been given. By the way, the first time we heard of recently in the past 2 years where that's happened is at one of these conferences where the frontline doctors, one of which we mentioned, were at the conference. And it wasn't just them, it was like some of the audience got sick as well. Yes. And then we don't know who, but in that conversation where they're relaying to the interviewer, someone proposed that it must have been, or they saw a toxin, or someone was spraying something in the conference room, in the place of the conference. Okay? And what I like to say about that is the human intelligence aspect may or may not be there. I can see where it would be, where someone could be there doing those things. But what we offer as a perspective is if you are the attacker, and if you have access to remotely targeting people, and if it's based on something that's in the bodies of a couple of billion people because of the chemtrail program over the past 30 years, then as long as you have their signature, you can track them wherever they go. So that when they're on stage and they're about to speak, and you turn on the beam, or you turn on a set of beams from a chain of satellites that are all working in unison on that target with that GPS location at the same time, that person becomes affected. Everyone else is wondering what's happening to this person. They can't speak intelligibly, or they look like they're sick. And what that does is that removes the human intelligence aspect of someone having to be on the ground with let's say a microwave gun aimed at the person that's carrying out the speech of importance, or having to poison an entire crowd to draw suspicion. Instead, it's just the one person. And so that's what we're trying to offer here, is that technology is available. We believe it's been used for a long time because there's lack of deniability. If you want to find the evidence to sustain, to support that research, then I would call on you to look at what we talked about, the interview of Barry Trower, who was an MI5, ex-Navy technician that worked for the British Royal Navy that dealt with working on these technologies directly. And other whistleblowers and other presentations that we've done that have come forward and said, this stuff is not only real, I worked on it not realizing what it was really for. And what we're saying is this is being used on people right now. This is being used on people right now, and we're trying to have the audience, including the frontline doctors who are being targeted in this way, to not look at just the biological aspect. It's very important now. It's very important because what we bring to the table is something that's very real and something that's not being acknowledged by anyone else. And if you don't accept this information, what we are genuinely are concerned with is your well-being and your health, and being unable to assess the situation you're in and possibly putting yourself in a situation where it can be made worse.
And we're gonna get to that in a second, because we do have concerns over people that have escaped the grids. We're going to define the grid, where that grid is, if you're being targeted, because people who are being targeted should not be in this grid. And if you got out of the grid by leaving the country and going to a country that doesn't have the same infrastructure as that grid, then you're probably safer in that other country than going back into the country with the grid. And someone who has never been targeted with electronic weapons and has no idea what it's like to go through being microwaved for telling the truth really should not be suggesting that somebody who is being targeted and has left that electronic grid, which is the grid that's needed to target you with these weapons, to say, come back into the grid where they can target you some more. Okay, I'm frustrated at that. We'll get into that in a second, but can we just for a second go back to this aerosolized chemicals narrative that's been floating around? Is there any evidence at all that there's aerosolized chemicals? Did anybody do any kind of analysis?
Absolutely not.
With swabs, or I don't know, how do you test for aerosolized chemicals? I don't think anybody's ever actually done any tests to say that, yes, it's aerosolized chemical toxins that made me sick. Instead, they're just saying that instead of saying maybe it was energy weapons. Maybe it was microwaves.
By the way, in the background, you hear our puppies barking. That's what's going on there.
We have 2 new puppies, and you're just going to have to deal with that. Maybe we'll throw a picture of them up here, because they're really cute.
Yeah,
and it's what we did to combat all the evil we deal with on a regular basis.
We deal with cuddliness to balance out the straight up horror that some people seem to want to take part in. So what we want to mention with that is, again, with these large conferences with a lot of people, yes, you can poison the salad bar and everyone gets sick. But to what end do you do that? What's the point of doing that? Because that would only draw suspicion. But the real situations, I'm reminded of what happened to Dr. Patar when he gave his testimony at one of the conferences he was at, and he was next on stage, and he basically couldn't talk.
Yeah.
He was going through an attack while he was on stage.
And again, he blamed it on the water. I think he said they put something in my water bottle. Because
I'm sure to some degree, again, like with Dr. Ardis, you're a speaker at a conference, and again, this was just why we wonder if there's other alternative modes of relaying information that doesn't require your physical presence at a conference, considering the state that this planet's in right now.
Well, that's the thing I wanted to bring up.
But yeah. I know we're going to get to that. But having said that, okay, if you decide to go on a conference, that is always a risk. Mm-hmm. Out of courtesy, they give you free bottles of water while you're speaking. I hope you're able to scan that water before you drink, or bring your own supply of water and just respectfully decline. And that's always the case. But even if, let's say, the water was laced, let's say with a heavy metal like arsenic. Your body is now flooded with heavy metals. If someone was to target you remotely out of a crowd of people, what would they pick up? Probably the thing that they laced the bottled water with. And what we're trying to convince the frontline doctors, after years of research and a book we've written and all the testimonials of the whistleblowers and all the other people in the target individual community, to really consider the energetic aspect of a weapon system that is targeting you remotely, to remove bad actors that are human beings so that they're not at risk, is a cheaper solution to target you remotely from high altitude, from above you, which is pretty much a direct line of sight. And with certain frequencies, a concrete ceiling is no problem. And you're there about to give a speech, and if you have a couple of satellites that are chained together in a link of some sort, they turn on their cyclotrons at the same time, and all of a sudden you have a hard time talking without coughing. These things are possible now. The technology that Barry Trower was talking about was at least 20 years old. So these things are well developed, and that's why we're bringing it up.
Well, I want to say something.
Right.
I was targeted at conferences. I was a keynote speaker at a handful of conferences. This was back in 2014, and I was targeted at these conferences by going to be at a physical conference in front of an audience of people and traveling to get there. That is what put you into a vulnerable position to be targeted.
Surrounded by people you don't know.
Surrounded by people you don't know, surrounded by strangers. I was targeted in a number of ways. I won't even want to get into that now, but it was because I was speaking at conferences. So if you are a whistleblower and you are a truth teller and you've got, information that you're trying to get out there, I strongly suggest you stop going to these conferences physically.
And find alternative modes of reaching people.
Okay? Phone it in. There's no reason why you can't be on a Zoom call at the conference.
There are plenty
Phone it in.
There are plenty of platforms that have large bandwidth.
The information is what's most important. Your physical presence at this conference in that grid. Where's the conference being held? Okay?
Right.
So my strong suggestion, and this has been the case for years because I've been targeted at conferences, and I will never go to another conference physically ever again for the rest of my life. That's how strongly I feel about it. Phone it in. And it's not just because of traveling situations, because we don't live in America right now. It's because of, it's a trap. Remember that Stargate thing? It's a trap.
Star Wars.
Sorry, Star Wars. I get them mixed up. We're fans of both shows. But so I think that conferences are they're very dangerous for whistleblowers and truth tellers. And something else I want to say, for anybody that is a whistleblower and a truth teller or frontline doctor in this day and age, you need to have security. You need to have some form of security around your life.
And by the way, security, what I mean by security, and this is not going to go down well. It doesn't matter how I say it. I'm not talking about people who say they're X this or X that.
As in ex-military,
I'm talking about X three-letter agency.
Ex-CIA.
The reason why I say that is those are the number one operators of the Target Individual program because they have access to that information. They have back doors to the platform that they're using to target the population. So I know from a certain standpoint, well, that makes sense. You work for the government, therefore you know what you're doing. Unless they're working for the Target Individual program, in which case they're not going to tell you they're still active in the program, and they'll gladly take your money to hire them as security. But at the same time, they'll gladly tell you that where you're at risk, but they don't tell you that you're being targeted remotely. And that's the problem. That is the problem. The government itself is targeting you, which means everyone who worked in the program, who worked for the government in those operations will not tell you, but they've left and you're hiring them. And so that's, as far as vectors, that's an area that can be compromised. You actually have to hire someone who may have had some experience but is not read into those programs. I don't know how to do that unless you find someone that's basically good at shooting people and has legal standing and is not read in at that level. Because the two cases that we hear of frontline doctors where their life was at threat, they had security. That wasn't the problem. But clearly the security weren't able to assess the situation that the person being targeted was in. They weren't able to say, excuse me, we think he might be remotely targeted.
Was that the case in Scarface? Where all his security turned on him?
Well, they weren't up for the challenge because he went against a Colombian mafia guy that was much more overwhelming than he was. So and he misread that. You know, he died. So my point is, though, there are contractors out there that are very open that you can still find online talking about what to do if you're being electronically targeted. Mm-hmm. You have to look at that angle because when that's dismissed, what you're doing is you're opening yourself up to the kind of people who would be targeting you remotely or would know of that, but they won't tell you.
Right, but I have to interject, okay? I have to say a couple things here that I think could be really helpful. Yes, you know, hiring security guards, that's one thing, but I want to take it down to a more base level about just what security actually means. It's not just hiring some guards to watch your six, right? That's not all that security is. You need, now Tivon has been through, military training, and he was telling me that basic 101 training is they teach you to be observant of your environment. If you're in a certain situation, you have to ask certain questions of people, like if there's all these people sitting around in a weird situation, like how are all these people getting their money? How are all these people paying their bills? What are all these people's motives, right? So you have to be very, very observant of the people around you, the places that you're at, map things out before you travel. Before I travel anywhere, I go on all the different internet resources and I find, where do they have Wi-Fi? Where do they have climate control, air conditioning, heating, whatever kind of things that I need for my personal comfort? Is it out in the country? Is it right in the middle of a city? Is it close to a supermarket so I can buy my own food? Am I going to be held hostage to the restaurant, right? Things like that. That's security.
Yes.
That's security. When we travel, we try to find places that are like, personalized people that we can speak to. We can speak to a person like Airbnb. I know Airbnb has some bad stuff, but a lot of it's good stuff. It's private individuals that you can just find their place. You can read the reviews. You can speak to the person before you go there. You can say, how far is the supermarket? And do you have a kitchen? And I'm going to cook my own food. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to drink my own bottled water. Yes. Or I'm going to bring my own water filter.
Or a distiller.
You have to do a ton of research before you travel. And if you're relocating to a different place, then you have to do a ton of research there too. That is security. And then you have to have physical barriers of security too. Are you living in a big building with a ton of people, or are you in a house out in the middle of the country? There's all sorts of different things that what we mean by security. So I think that the number one thing there is for people to be aware and to do research and to do not leave all those travel plans in the hands of somebody else.
Yes.
By just saying, I'm just going to book my flight, jump on my plane, go to this place, be at this conference, and not do any research about the area, parks nearby, resources nearby. Know the number of the police station.
Yes.
Know the number of, look up all the local stuff in that community that you're going to so that you have knowledge. Your knowledge is your number one security weapon to keep you safe.
It probably might save you. And
save your life. Have some knowledge before you go. So that's, in addition to having some armed guards that aren't ex-alphabet agency people, that's kind of what we mean by security. Let's talk about the grid.
Right.
Okay? The reason why we want to talk about this grid, we want to frame something for everybody here, because what we're not seeing in these conversations where people are saying, come back to this country where you'll be safe because we have jurisdiction here and we can help you by putting you in safe houses So you can run from safe house to safe house in this country that is in the grid. Okay, so what we're going to do, this is coming from a person that doesn't understand that there's energy weapons that rely on an energy grid to run the energy weapons that they're using to target these whistleblowers. So, where is the grid?
So if you look at the history of the development of the direct energy weapons program, what you'd see is a transfer of technology coming from the Eastern Bloc, European countries, post-World War II, Germany, Russia, into America, and from that point, the Five Eyes countries.
And the Five Eyes are?
So the Five Eyes are, if you're defining the actual program of the countries that are involved in the Five Eyes program, you're looking at Australia, New Zealand, America, Canada, UK.
Okay, and Europe.
Well, yeah, but Five Eyes.
So those are the Five Eyes.
And then plus Europe, if you want to extend it to the G7, you can. The G7 nations in that web. But
it is a web.
But that is the central hub. And what we're talking about is a all-encompassing surveillance program. Okay, fine. Surveillance program is one level, but on top of that surveillance program is an offensive, highly offensive, destructive grid that tries to destroy its dissidents through quiet and silent means. And we want the audience to understand that.
Quiet weapons for silent wars?
There are titles, there are books that are written on this, there are whistleblowers that have come out about this. A lot of these books you can even get on Amazon about electronic harassment, electronics weapons program. And people have come forward who've worked on those programs and feel sorry for having been a part of it. But the point is, these programs they exist, they're silent, and they can be used to remove someone from society. They can be used to make someone ill, sick, and they torture them as an individual 24/7. They can cause divorce and split among families. They can cause division among families and your friends. To remove you from society and to remove, if you're employed, to make you unemployed, because now people think you're crazy. So it's like what was used in the Soviet Union. It's like what was used in East Germany to get you removed from society. On top of that, then you have the psychotronic electronic harassment aspect of it. It's very real, it's very mature, and that's what's being used today.
So, you are in their grid where they can use these weapons on you if you are in the United States, Canada, New Zealand,
in the United States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, UK.
Australia, UK, and Europe.
And Europe.
European countries are very much connected to that grid of those other countries.
There are satellite nations around that, but to the degree in which they're able to coordinate things depends on the value of the target.
Yes.
But what I will say is that if you're in any of those nations, you're pretty much in full saturation.
Full saturation.
The community around you can become weaponized within 2 or 3 days.
Okay, just go through an airport at the UK and count the cameras. Yes. Count the surveillance. Count the security and the surveillance cameras and the facial scanning and recognition. Every room you go to is bugged. You are in a very highly saturated grid. Now, China has its own grid.
Yes.
But the interesting thing about China's grid is that there is a sort of a firewall where China's grid of surveillance doesn't really communicate with the Five Eyes plus Europe grid that we just talked about here. One way to do some research on this, if you're looking to leave that grid, is just do some basic research on the technological development of whatever country it is that you're going to. Go to the Ookla map and see how many 5G towers there are in that country.
Yeah, you want to go to a country that does not have 5G towers.
Okay, the more 5G towers, the more saturated that weapons grid is. So the question I pose for someone who's saying, come out of this country and come back to America, tell me about the grid in Mexico.
The surveillance grid.
How many 5G towers are there in Mexico? Because I'm sure, yes, there's drug cartels in Mexico.
Yes.
Yes, there's some dangerous areas of Mexico. I'm not saying that that's not true. But personally, I believe that Mexico is much safer for a whistleblower who is running and fleeing for their life, that is being targeted with electronic weapons that need the grid in order to operate. I think they're much safer in Mexico than they are going back into the grid.
Also, if we're going to talk about safety as far as record, what's happened in the past? Before this current situation that required frontline doctors with the current pandemic, before that, it was the biological, the holistic doctors. Mm-hmm. Everyone who's been in the alternative media or been following it knows of the stories of the holistic doctors over the past, 5-6 years, where they were basically either going against GMO or going against whatever vaccines were coming out at the time. The holistic doctors, there's a period of time within the recent years where they were being killed off. They were being murdered, and it was all within the United States grid. Mm-hmm. Had nothing to do with safe houses or nothing like that. They were under attack, and it was for the work that they were doing, or other people that were disclosing that information. The problem with being in that grid is that it's instantaneous. Everything is real time, and if you're going to disclose information that brings about, I don't know what you want to call it. Brings about the truth to basically destroy any nefarious plans that are hatched from that grid, then that grid can be weaponized on you instantaneously. Your bank account could be shut down. You can be fired, so now you don't have a means of income for most people. So now you go homeless. And then when you start talking about what's happening to you because you're being tortured at night, you're seeing this crazy. So now your friends and your family members are weaponized against you to try to get you admitted into a psychiatric ward. That is the pattern. And that pattern is brought right from the Eastern Bloc, Europe, right from the Eastern Bloc. So to avoid that pattern, and now we're going back to literally Egypt and Moses, you literally have to leave their system.
You have to leave.
You have to withdraw your services and yourself and leave that system and go somewhere else. And what you're doing is you're actually bringing physical distance between you and the origin of that attack. Now, I know people will say, well, go back. It's kind of ironic, and I'm going to say this just to put it out there. It's similar to as if someone was raping you and saying, you can't leave this rape house. Because if you leave this rape house, I'm going to chase you to the ends of the earth. Mm-hmm. It's the last thing actually he wants you to do, is to leave the rape house and to shout from the rooftops and go state to state shouting how you're being attacked by this man. That's the last thing he wants, because it brings attention to the attack. Well, the Bible says otherwise. If the person is coming at you and seeking this thing from you, give them the shirt, give them the cloak, give them everything.
And leave.
And leave. But while you're giving these things to them, you're drawing attention from the crowd to the public spectacle that this has become.
Yep.
So there's things to be said about making physical distance from where you were being attacked at.
Yes.
And going to another country in this case. Actually, I think that might be the wisest thing you can do. Because now, whoever's doing this, whether it's someone with a low mind, or it's an actual organization, that will be brought to the light if they continue with this program overseas to you as the victim. So I think it's good to bring that physical distance. And while you're away, it brings other people who are not part of that grid to see any occurrences that happen around you. So that's what you're doing by doing that.
Something else to take into consideration is that nobody does this dirty work for free. So if somebody is targeting you, somebody has to pay that person to target you, or they have to pay that team or that government agency to put you on that list and target you. So when you leave the grid, you basically triple the financial requirements.
At least.
For that person or team to target you. And sometimes it basically is just a drop-off, like, this target is not important enough to spend that much money to target them, just by leaving the grid.
Yes.
We cannot stress that enough. You leave that grid and you find out what freedom and peace really can be.
I like to illustrate the insanity of what, for example, the globalists from the World Economic Forum would say.
Mm-hmm.
You'll have nothing, you'll eat the bugs. All of you. So this isn't clearly a crazy person, but because we're living in an upside down world, there are powers and principalities that like to follow through with that mandate. So we have 380 million, between 380 million people in America. Basically what they're saying is most of you will be slaves.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine the amount of bandwidth it would take to follow people around 24/7, torture them 24/7, and to cut off their bank accounts and make sure they have no access to money 24/7? Personally, I think that would be impossible. I think such a system won't last long. But if that's the goal, then the easiest way of exposing such a program and to make it difficult for them is to remove yourself from the system and make it more costly for them to do such things to you personally.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to go beyond their borders, you're going to increase their bandwidth and the time of the satellite. Everything dealing with surveillancing someone comes down to bandwidth and the cost of that bandwidth.
That's right.
And the cost
and that's their limitation, and that's their weak point.
And the cost of energy needed to, let's say, take that target out.
You want to get off the list? Make yourself too expensive to have them keep you on that list.
Because you're already on that list. I don't know what you guys think. What do people think the last 30 years of the chemtrail program has been all about?
Mm-hmm.
Having done all this research, I've come to the hard conclusion it was about getting certain things in us so that we can be targeted. And this is before COVID.
Yeah.
Right? To some degree, with enough radiation, you can target people, you can track them. But to the cost of how much it takes to take someone out anywhere on the planet, that's a whole other matter.
And there's another little thing with other countries that are off the grid. There's all these different legal agreements that you then have to go through in order to obtain somebody that's on your list, like non-extradition agreements.
Yes.
Okay, there's things like that to consider as well.
And then also economic climates. There might be a situation where the president in power in one country is pretty much hated by the rest of the world. So that country that used to be friendly with that nation might not be so friendly anymore. It introduces a whole other level of logistics needed to keep someone on the make someone targeted.
Or, there are still many places in the world where they don't live this highly modernized Western lifestyle, and it still comes down to simple people that live in villages that are very close to the earth. And if you go and become friends with the local people that live in that country, they will defend you. And they will protect you and they will hide you.
And this is where it becomes important. Whether you live in America or you live anywhere else on the planet, at the end of the day, it comes down to trust.
Mm-hmm.
Trust in your neighbors, which comes back to the Bible. Trust in your neighbors. Work things out with them. And if you're in a position where you can actually employ a few to do some work for you in return,
or helping them with their families.
Or helping them, or that's what I mean, you're helping them with their families. You're getting familiar with the local community. The way it should be. You get familiar with the local community. You build a bond so that anyone who's doing anything nefarious to anyone on the planet gets exposed, and they get expelled, and they get revealed. That is where we want to be.
When you get to a level, if you're in a foreign culture, and you're there and you become friends with the people and you help people and you get to the level where the local villagers are coming to your door with their children who are sick or injured, and you're helping them to heal their children, that gives you a level of protection that you can't even put a price tag on.
You can't put a price on it.
You can't.
And you can't have these lizards come in from afar that were trying to target you, come in and try to somehow coerce the village. They don't have that ability.
And all I can say is we're speaking from experience.
We're speaking from experience, and we want those who are in hopefully they're not, but if they're being targeted, to take this on board, because we really are thinking about them.
Another thing I want to mention quickly is McAfee. Okay? McAfee was not the most upstanding guy. There was a lot about him that we don't agree with his lifestyle. However, the thing about McAfee, is that he lived in, what country was it? Belize?
He's living, I think it's Belize and in the Caribbean in general.
Yeah, he lived in a foreign country, off-grid. He lived off-grid for the longest time. And he lived a life free from being oppressed or thrown in jail or targeted or any of that other stuff for a very long time.
Yes.
Until, for some reason, he decided to go back into that grid.
Yes.
And he got caught at an airport in Europe.
Trying to leave.
He left the protection of the off-grid world, went into Europe, and they got him at the airport, arrested him, and he ended up dead.
In prison.
In prison. So I just wanted to bring that up. If anybody knows that story, it's like...
If anyone... Well, I mean, a lot of people in the alternative, especially technology area, dealing with cryptography and cryptocurrency. He was a maverick.
Mm-hmm.
Ran an antivirus software that was very popular. He was definitely pro freedom, pro privacy. He was a mentor for a lot of people. They saw him as someone that they like to emulate, someone that was able to go challenge the system as far as its overreach, and it's real. All I can say is it's real. I mean, he just done a lot of projects on the behalf of the government that he didn't disclose, but it seemed like he was a very influential human being. He's a very influential human being. He was able to change the minds of a lot of people. And so someone like him was definitely a target because he wasn't with the status quo. He was very strong-willed. But it's to show that being attacked by the grid and the governments that are of that grid, to not give you your day of court but rather see you dead in prison, is a very common thing for very strong leaders. And we say this, we bring this out to show that this thing of being attacked by the grid is very real. If you are a targeted individual, that is indeed what's happening. You have to take it on board, cling to Jesus, cling to God,
mm-hmm.
and He has something waiting for you that your life can be amazing, and maybe even a way for others who are also suffering. And we want this to be an opportunity, especially if you're one of these frontline doctors. Again, like what we mentioned in the beginning of the program, it seems like this year particularly, a lot of frontline doctors have been targeted. They think it's poison because of their paradigm. And to some degree, they have been poisoned. They've done the chemical analysis.
Well, microwave radiation is poison.
Microwave radiation is poison, and it emulates a lot of things either dealing with chemical or radiological, like nuclear radiation.
Mm-hmm.
On top of that, there is real on-the-ground poisoning, somebody coming and replacing your water supply.
Yeah.
So with all those things given, you have to ask yourself, who is capable of doing these things to my life, to take the time 24 hours of the day to target me almost in an automated system in this way? And you only can draw a few conclusions. You have to think to yourself, am I safe here? Am I safe here? And what am I prepared to do to survive? Hopefully for me and my family. What am I prepared to do to survive? And if it means you have to leave out of your own personal deduction, mm-hmm. then so be it. But don't let anyone dissuade you. You are an adult with an intelligent, thinking, knowledgeable mind, and you've come to a very logical conclusion. Do not let people dissuade you. If you go to a decision, like in the military, you stick with it, you go with it, you take it on board, and you take it, and you do it. You do it, you don't tell anyone. You follow through, and when you follow through, you're all in. Don't be 1 foot in and 1 foot out. You have to go all in.
And that's what it is to be a Christian as well.
Amen.
All of me for God. I want to talk really quickly about this concept about, people that look like crap, like Karen Kingston. She said in her thing, I look like crap. No. And some people have been criticizing that she didn't look like herself. Some people have said, that's not the real Karen Kingston, she's a clone, or something like that. Uh-huh. Or other people are like, I don't know, she didn't sound right because towards the end of her 45-minute live stream, she was talking really fast and she was saying things kind of like jumbled and confused.
Yes.
Can we just take a moment to express When you are being targeted with energy weapons and they're frying you and you can't sleep and you've got, maybe she's got voice to skull. Voice to skull is pretty awful.
And who would admit,
Saying
who
things,
would admit that they're actually hearing voices?
Okay? You're not in your best way. You don't look good. You didn't have the 2 hours to sit in a hair and makeup chair to make sure you had enough foundation to cover up circles under your eyes or double chins or whatever it is that hair and makeup can do. Look at some of those videos on YouTube or wherever where they've got people that before their makeup and then they put the makeup on and they look like a totally different person.
The TikTok videos.
Okay, and let's not even talk about the lighting. When you're in some studio lighting setup, okay? She jumped on a phone. She threw her phone in front of her face. Who knows if she had been sleeping? She probably hadn't slept in a long time. Maybe she, when you're targeted and you're being tortured,
you're lucky.
by this stuff,
You're lucky if you can sleep. You're lucky if you can get some sleep.
So I want to say thank you very much to Karen Kingston for being brave enough to put your face on a video when you didn't have your hair and makeup done.
Yeah.
So that you could get a message across that was important because it had to do with your life. And you are beautiful just the way you are.
And you're a sister, and we love you.
You are a sister in Christ. And I want to say another thing to any of these frontline doctors, these whistleblowers. I just want to make sure that everybody is made aware. If you know these people that are working on these front lines, and they're going around to conferences, and they're getting sick, and they're getting poisoned, we're hoping that this conversation will give them some awareness of how they can be targeted and how they can protect themselves. I don't want to see people end up like Dr. Buttar.
I don't want to see another one of those.
I don't want to see another one of these people on the front lines ending up like this. So we pray for Karen Kingston. We pray for her safety. We don't know her personally. We've referenced her work a ton in the past. We're members of her Substack, one of the highest members there because we want to support her in any way that we can. She is not easy to get a hold of right now. A lot of people that know her personally are trying to talk to her, and she's not.
We pray that she's safe.
Yeah.
We pray that she's safe.
Maybe she'll hear this video. Maybe somebody will send her this video, and she can get some insight on this. She can contact us at any time, and there's things we can tell her privately that we think would be really helpful to her in her situation, because what she's going through in our own way, we have been through it. We have a very deep history of being targeted, and I just want to say that it's the energy industry that is doing this targeting, which is they're targeting her, and it's the same industry that targeted us in the past. So we have the same enemies.
I guess what I want to say briefly is it's going to be difficult trying to find out who the initial operator was that would put you on a list. Because I've tried since 2014, and I've come to the conclusion it could be for any of the number of things I was involved in, including my military background. I can't say what department did it. I can't say the individual who did it. It can go from someone that just found me offensive.
Yep.
It just didn't like me, to a department that didn't like me either at that point in time and said at some point in the future we're going to put them on a database. And because I realized I was in the military, and I realized it could have been a joint command, which involves other organizations outside the military, I just put that aside and say I'm not going to find who my perpetrators are. But what I am going to do is find a way to defeat the things that were debilitating me and help others along the way. And I think that's the best approach of looking at this. Just know that, acknowledge that if you've been targeted in the way that it looks like it's been, especially for someone like Karen, that at that point it's a principality you're dealing with. It is not an individual. And at that level, they want you to stick to individuals instead of looking at the real main problem, which is a system that's run amok, that is taking advantage of its power to attack people that they deem as dissidents, and you're learning how to live under those conditions. But you know what? You can actually not only survive, you can thrive under those conditions. And we have total faith, being children of Christ, that you will survive and you will do very well, and you'll bring other people to the fold.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. We hope that this helped a lot of people that are brave enough to do this work, to get this information out there, to be the truth tellers in a time of such darkness and such tribulation that we're all living in right now. If you haven't found Jesus yet as your God, we really pray that you find him, because we would not know how we would get through this targeting if it was not for the light of Christ and the power of God that tells us that no weapon formed against us
Shall prosper.
So with that, we say farewell to the next video, and we hope that you leave any of your thoughts and comments below this video, and please share this far and wide with somebody that you think might need to see it. We put a lot of work out there. We're hoping that it can help people. It's our mission, because, we're survivors of this, and we're also Christians and warriors for God in this time of evil.
Amen.